we thought we'd be a bit innovative. Rather than always asking the Commission to answer all questions, we've turned it on its head, and we let you ask questions of all the other stakeholders. I'm looking forward to the discussion, Matthias. Thank you so much for being with us.
Fantastic, Nicholas. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well, and good morning, everybody. Yes, it's an unusual role, but I'm sure it will work out fine. And I'm in very, very good company today. So we're, I think, in very good hands. Also, especially after the kind of rapporteur, Mr. Hoogeveen, having set the scene and already touching up on some of the themes that I think we will now try to dig into during this panel discussion. So indeed, open finance, data sharing financial sector, it's an important theme, as already alluded to by the rapporteur. This is certainly a theme, data access, data sharing, depending on how you want to label it, is certainly a kind of a theme that is of broader relevance than to finance as such. But of course, it is important in the financial sector as well, and where, in a sense, digitalization leads to an increase in data. There's a lot of value in that data, both for people, customers, consumers, and for the firms providing the financial services themselves. And the question is, how do we best kind of extract that value for the benefit of the consumer and firms as well? What we'll see during this panel is that, of course, this is not new as such. There has been some regulatory ventures. We heard from José Manuel Campa before, who was asked about the open banking experiences. There's obviously a lot of market experimentation happening. I think we'll hear from some of the panel participants about what we can learn from that. And obviously, we have a FIDA proposal now, which we have put on the table. And as we heard from a rapporteur, and as I'm sure we will hear also from Andre and others, it is at an important juncture, at this current juncture in the European Parliament, where indeed the Parliament is trying to make up its mind about what it thinks about the Commission proposal. And of course, it is also generating a lot of debate in Council and from stakeholders more generally. So it's a great time to have this panel. I'm very happy to welcome the experts sitting on this panel, coming from various kind of perspectives, be it practitioners, be it supervisors, as well as policymakers, who I think will be able to contribute very well from their respective kind of perspective and viewpoints and expertise. So who do we have? We have obviously Andre Kovarik, who is a member of the European Parliament, and indeed the shadow rapporteur on FIDA. And just to mention this panel, I think also have broader responsibilities for other ventures, like open banking, payment services, etc. So we're very well placed to provide a broader overview as well about how FIDA fits into that bigger picture. We have Mr. Simonas Krepsta, who will add a look at the kind of supervisory perspective and kind of a member state view to some extent. We have Mr. Joris Hansen, who is founder and co-lead of Deutsche Bank, actively involved in data sharing in Deutsche Bank, big important player, very interesting to have our experience. Maximilian Hamsen, partner at the German digital payments lead at PricewaterhouseCoopers, so kind of very plugged into the kind of broader industrial overview and kind of contribute to an industry perspective. We have Aoife Houlihan from Visa, who I believe has been actively engaged in the kind of, in particular in open banking under PSD2, and has a lot of expertise and experience to draw from that. So what I'll try to do during this panel is that perhaps we'll start trying to have a little bit of a broader discussion, a little bit more at strategic level in terms of what we see as the kind of strategic opportunities and risks, both at a general level, perhaps for a sector, but also from a consumer perspective. So that I think will be the opening gamut for the kind of discussion rounds. And then we'll dig in a little bit about how do we best achieve that? What have we tried before? What has happened? What can we learn from that? What broader initiatives are out there? And how does FIDA fit in? Does it fit in? And if not, what can be done? And then dig in a little bit into the kind of various building blocks of FIDA, with perhaps a particular emphasis on the standardization part, which is a tricky one, and where we have a lot of expertise on this panel to kind of to feed that debate. But without any further ado, perhaps starting with a strategic overview. Andre, we've heard the rapporteur's edition. And from your perspective, Andre, what are your views on, say, the strategic opportunities of data sharing in finance. What do you see as the kind of opportunities, and what do you see as the kind of key risks?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Matthias. I hope you can hear me fine. It's
Very
working.
well.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation. It was actually very good summarized. I think the current status of work of our committee in the European Parliament on the proposal from Michiel, our rapporteur, and very timely debate actually, as we are currently finalizing our inputs in terms of amendments to the Commission proposal. But I'm actually really glad that you opened our discussion with this strategic view, because I think this is something that we should also have a discussion on, because well, on the one hand, we have a concrete proposal from the European Commission that we should work on, focus on. But I think it's let's say it's an opening initiative in this regard. We're trying to address some, I think, key aspects of the future, not only of financial sector, but I think of economy, which is digitalization and how we handle data. We have, let's say, new architecture of regulations and legislative framework in Europe on how we should deal with data. Now we have a specific proposal for the financial data access, and I think, having said that, I think really that we should take our time and discuss properly with all stakeholders, all possible parties involved, be it the industry, be it the regulators, be it the consumer organizations, because in order to make sure that this proposal is actually delivering on what we expect to deliver, which is on one hand empowering consumer, giving better options to the market, to a certain extent actually I think even enhancing the digital single market features in Europe. And also to give companies, let's say, new ways for innovation, or new alleys for future innovation. I think this will require a lot of efforts. I think it was said by Michiel that we are actually handling this file at the very end of the legislative mandate of this European Parliament. In 4 months' time, a bit more, this European election. So we basically have 3 months left before this Parliament concludes its work. So I think it's actually good to initiate a discussion. We know that we won't be able to finalize it, but I think it's actually, I see it as a good opportunity actually for everybody involved to take its stance and actually give us their views and ideas. I don't think we really need, and this is also what I would expect from to hear from colleagues on the panel. I don't think, or I don't see an urgency coming from the market on the fact that we need to legislate on this matter right now. I think it would be actually good and beneficial if we get the right framework in place, but I think it will require some time. I think even Michiel, as a rapporteur, said that this is a very complex file, and I don't have to add that anytime we discuss in the European Parliament the issue of personal data and how the personal data is actually handled, it always raises a lot of political concerns, a lot of political voices. So I think this is also an important aspect to take into account. So I think that would be my approach to take. We have a good proposal from the Commission on the table right now, but I think we should see how we can process and progress with it in order to hand it to the next Parliament and also the next Commission in a sort of a state that we are able to find a workable political majority.
Okay, thank you very much, Andre. So to sum up, a good proposal on the table, important to get it right in order to kind of benefit, to deliver the kind of innovation benefit that you see in it, and the question whether the timing is right now. Now turning to Maximilian, from an industry perspective, with the kind of overview you have, and looking more, perhaps not so much the legislative agenda, but the kind of inherent opportunities and risks of data sharing in finance. What do you see from a kind of sector perspective?
Yeah, overall, we see opportunities for enlarging services, particularly from the financial services perspective. So combining different sets of data that not just include payments, but go much broader into other areas of daily banking. So I'm talking current accounts, insurance products, asset management products. So we have the opportunity to build a broader financial services offering for customers on the one hand, but also to connect services between different players in the market. If I look at the scope of FIDA, it's a wide scope. So lots of players involved. So there's also challenges coming to it. To unlock the value of the data means to also build access to the data. That comes, of course, in with a cost to provide the infrastructure. The scheme mechanisms have to be built. So there's significant work to be done in order to really make it work. And we've seen it with PSD2. That's been a road, and we will see similar ways to go for FIDA, as other players in the market, for instance, insurance companies, are not yet so much prepared versus banks that have already built their infrastructures in terms of open banking. So lots of potential, but also challenges in terms of cost and also unlocking data.
Yeah, thank you, Maximilian. That's very clear. So lots of potential, but also kind of challenges to deliver it, and that some are better prepared than others, since based on experience that you may have. So that's a little bit painting the general scene. Now looking more at it from a kind of a consumer perspective, and the kind of consumer trust in data sharing and the like. Simonas, from a kind of you have a supervisory perspective as well. Predominantly perhaps being a supervisor and a central banker. What do you see as the kind of key opportunities for consumers resulting from data sharing in finance? And what do you see, based on your experience, on the kind of risks that may arise?
So thank you. And it's first of all, I think in general, data sharing has huge potential for greater competition in the European financial markets, and of course better financial services for consumers and economic growth in general. And we see now that currently we have a business model sharing already in the market. Banking as a service is developing. We have technological sharing. We have cloud, financial services, and more financial institutions use cloud services, and it's pretty natural that data sharing could be another important milestone in promoting our financial services and making it more digital, more efficient, and of course a better value for consumers. So that's no doubt about that. So of course the big question is how to do it in the most effective way. So we have good start with the open banking in place. We have good lessons what worked and what not. From Lithuanian experience, of course, we saw that it was this external push, legislative push for the market players was absolutely needed. But then it was a lot of work on standards and how to make account information service, payment initiation service work in the market. And in Lithuania, we had a lot of kind of local work together with market participants, how to make the standard work, how to open the accounts, and how providers could use it. And we reach good results. For example, in Lithuania, payment initiation service is a great competitor for credit card payments. Actually, the turnover is 1.7 compared to credit card payments in e-commerce. And I think it's quite remarkable development. But for that, we needed to work very, very closely with the market participants on standards. And of course, to have more guidance and more kind of centralized standard setting across the board in European level would be a help. Now, when we turn to the next step and current proposal, of course, that's more broader, more complex, but of course more rewarding. If we could solve this complexity and share much more data in a safe manner, we could get much more efficient insurance services, investment services, mortgage services, and others. So for that, I think we should take a thoughtful approach, as it was mentioned. We should be clear on controls, because we see in other examples on cloud services, open banking as a service, controls should be in place, data should be protected. That's for sure. And I think we should take a modular approach. So we should think, where are the most benefits? Is it insurance financial services or investment financial services? Try to concentrate on these areas, work with the market players on standards, have an agreement, and go to the next model. So this kind of modular approach, I think, would be beneficial to really have the legislation which is understandable, it's safe, it's trusted by consumers, it's trusted by the private sector, financial players, and employed in real world.
Okay, broadening the perspective a little bit, Simona's follow-up question. Any discussion in the financial sector is never complete with kind of financial stability considerations. Typically in data sharing and I guess in the open banking, the financial stability considerations are perhaps not the first ones when it comes to somebody's mind. But from your perspective and your experience, do you see any kind of implications for these kind of broader prudential concerns, financial stability concerns, also in this particular policy area?
Well, definitely, and in part, I think March events in the banking sector in US, was a good example how the digital development could accelerate all the processes. Deposit turnover nowadays is much faster, as it seems, in crisis situation than it was previously. So of course we should think about this financial stability concerns. If we have good data sharing in place, of course everything happens much faster, and that could have financial stability implications. So but on the other hand, we should not be kind of fearful of that. We should be prepared on that. So if the liquidity is going faster, so we should have liquidity provision mechanism, liquidity support mechanism up to date and faster. And at the same time, regarding the data sharing, data will be moving faster around. That could have financial stability implications, but we should have some measures in place to counteract that if we face some major events.
Thanks, Simon. It's very interesting. So on the basis of what we've heard so far, there's data sharing has a lot of potential, it seems. There is a certain promise in it. Obviously, it comes with issues of control, making sure that you have all that kind of measures in place to address also the risks. And but there seems to be a degree of promise that maybe we're leveraging upon. So the question then is, how do we best achieve that? And as I alluded to in the beginning, as we've heard previously, FIDA, which is now on the table, is not the first proposal that tries to achieve this. We have both had regulatory ventures into data sharing and access to data in finance before. And of course, also the market is doing a lot of things. So let's perhaps turn to that now. And turning to you, Eva, we heard from Jose Manuel Campa of the EBA before, kind of saying that one can draw a lot of positive kind of lessons from the kind of open banking perspective experiences, but there seems to be potential there, but that the process has not been entirely smooth. There are certainly kind of lessons to be learned. From your perspective at Visa and the experiences you have as a company, what lessons do you believe we can draw from open banking experiences and PSD2 when trying to leverage the opportunities we've just heard now and addressing the risks?
Thank you. I think there's a lot of collective experience that is around because of the PSD2 process, which is slightly different. And I would say we do welcome the fact that we've delineated between other payments files and this particular topic. And that we also feel, I mean, understanding from the Parliament's point of view in particular, that this is a very considered process going forward, because we had a huge opportunity that has borne some fruit with PSD2. It was quite painful in many respects, especially regarding the second level work, which the EBA referred to. And that, there's a lot of good that has come out of that, is that bringing industry together, and actually probably is not as far apart as we thought we were from one another in many respects. And I say that because the revolution that occurred within PSD2 was actually the foundational concept that, how do we actually build an interoperable framework that can support both data sharing and data access. That has brought some benefits at very significant cost, but I don't think we have kept the consumer at the heart of it. It's still been very focused on the industry players speaking to one another. And this is to the point that was raised by the Parliament, is, are we talking about data sharing or data access? And I think it's a very important clarification on this point, because now we have the concept of permission dashboards, which is bringing back control, hopefully, but in a very deliberate and concerted way. And I think that's the piece that we need to create, a framework that we can build upon and innovate upon, and that's super important to the market, all sides of the market, and it's creating certainty. And I think sometimes we felt in parts PSD2 was a little bit built on sand, because there was so many layers that had not been really understood or thought about that became apparent in the second level piece. And I would, while this is quite boring, I would say again to the Parliament to please take into account, the clarification on data access, data holder, the governance piece, the liability piece, because when that framework is actually established and everyone understands that at a core level, then the technical work that layers upon that is easier. I think the second piece that we've seen is in parallel to this proposal, the SPA regime, which is about, which has been led by industry. It looks at a compensation and incentivization model, which has been probably somewhat lacking in PSD2. Now we're looking at it in FIDA, which is again very welcome, but it's also to make sure that we're not we're learning from PSD2. Like, there needs to be better incentives within the market, and those and in order for those investments to be made, in order for this to be realized. And I think that took a market level approach to get the SPA regime into some sort of framework. And now we're again looking at it through the FIDA eyes. And I think how we also bring those two together is very important. But there is a general understanding that there needs to be compensation and there needs to be incentivization within the system. That does not preclude, we're not monetizing consumers' data. That is not at all the topic here. It is just making sure that there's a sustainable framework. And I think that's one of the biggest learnings from the PSD2 as well, is a lot of cost and a lot of investment was being made, but not really understanding how that was going to be sustained, and also that there was incentives for all parties to participate within the framework.
Okay, thanks, Aoife. I think we'll return to many of these themes as we continue, but that already provides kind of a nice overview of the key learnings that you draw, at least from PSD2, alluding to the fact that perhaps FIDA has addressed at least some of them, but perhaps there's still a discussion to be had whether it's enough. So that is a little bit experience with the kind of regulatory ventures, but of course also the industry is, and we know that has not stopped at kind of sharing data to payments only, but there is a lot of experimentation going on. Joyce, from your perspective, a big, if not global, kind of bank with a lot of experience from various markets and various business lines, including data sharing. What is your take on what is happening right now and the implications that has for regulation aimed at kind of facilitating data sharing? Have we taken a step in the right direction? Are there more things to consider? What is happening?
Yeah, there's so many things in my head from what just had been said. Two sentences up front. So basically, my perspective is that we started an API program even before PSD2 came into place, with the idea of enabling partners to develop products for their customers and new products for our customers through partnerships. So I have years of experience of working with partners. We have 60 partnerships right now and more than 40 API products, we call it. It's basically data bundled in a meaningful way. So when I look at the changes right now, I think they are wonderful, right? Everything that is happening is wonderful, because I like this idea of innovation, having a wider choice of service and products in the customer's hands. It has been said in the beginning. And I can definitely say that is true. Like, think together with partners about new products for customers in terms of where you can take banking data to create an additional value in your life as a consumer is fantastic. On the other hand, when we think about risks, I think it's hard work too, because it's not like, there are some easy examples around personal financial management maybe, and some like things that are quite obvious. But there are other examples, for instance, when I look at examples in the corporate space or wealth management space. So it's kind of an approach of step-by-step developing something with a partner, starting early on, understanding what is the context you would be using banking data. So what I want to say is, I think I like what Simon has said about the modular approach, right? Because by working with a partner, you learn what is meaningful, what is data that you can actually use, what would need to be adopted, what works, what doesn't. And that's pretty helpful, because at the end of the day, rolling out new products, I think, is the core of what we should aim at, right? Because everything we do, all the discussion around what's the scope, schemes, yes, it's good. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that we see a lot of examples of open finance products in the hand of the customers. And I think this is why I also like the approach right now we are taking. I think at the end of the day, from an API perspective, I think it shouldn't stop with financial data, because a lot of discussions we have with industry players are not only focused around financial industries, but they look at products. And if you look at a product, you do not think in boundaries of industries, but rather, okay, what is an additional value? What is a new feature? And from this perspective, I think it would be wonderful if we would be talking about mixing up industry data in years from now. I can definitely say there is a benefit for everyone in it. Beside the customer, partners can benefit of additional features they can build, or maybe a completely new product. Through partnerships with a bank, they can benefit of an existing brand. It's super important if you are a young company with new reputation. I think it's also creating trust for the consumer. And last but not least, we as banks, we have new sales channels, new opportunities to win customers, retain customers. So I think there's some opportunity for everyone involved. But let's not forget, at the end of the day, it's not a sprint, but rather a marathon. So I would definitely opt for a step-by-step approach, and considering to learn gradually while shipping out products for our customers.
Thank you, Joris. That's very interesting. So a lot of kind of focus on the, also from your perspective, on the kind of value from data sharing, kind of providing new products, call for kind of not restricting yourself to the financial sector, but also get access to data elsewhere in order to kind of feed these and build these products. Now, you obviously have a lot of access to data yourself, given that you're big cross-border banks. How do you see the cooperation working out in terms of sharing data with other kind of institutions, or getting access to data from other institutions that may be of interest to you as well? Do you find that clear? Are these kind of negotiations or kind of concluding access agreements straightforward, easy?
You mean in terms of we as a bank access data from other institutions to kind of leverage it?
Yes, or giving access to your data. Are you facing requests like that?
I mean, sure. I think like obviously you see a lot of aggregators in the market that do this job right now. I think this is the predominant space where you see a lot of access and also usage from other bank. So I would say in terms of focus, we put a lot of time into building up the internal capabilities in the last couple of years to have APIs in place, not only in the retail space, but also to build products for our corporate customers. Have like an API first culture, have a global API platform in-house so that you can leverage all the assets you have globally. So that was more of our focus other than accessing data from other institutions.
Okay, very clear. Now, so we've set the scene pretty broadly in terms of both kind of the overall strategic opportunities and risks for the sector, consumers, the kind of experiences that we've had so far, what we can learn from these, the data sharing that's happening on the market, and the kind of industry perspectives in that respect. Now, approaching the subject matter of FIDA itself, Andre, you kind of made a number of comments in the beginning where some of the questions that you're asking yourself seem to be a little bit about how do we approach, say, open finance in the financial sector and how it relates to other initiatives such as, I guess, PSD, open banking, but perhaps also the kind of broader, more generally, data architecture proposals that you refer to. What are the kind of key focus there, or the kind of key concerns that you have that you think that we need to get right in terms of the relation, how FIDA fits into that in that broader kind of framework?
Yes, thank you for that point. Actually, it was very interesting to hear colleagues from the panel giving their views, and I think also based on some of the previous intervention, definitely one of the key points to consider would be not only the scope of the framework, but I think also maybe the sort of a speed with which we would roll it out and ask the businesses or let's say the specific parts of the financial sector to engage in the financial data access framework. And I think in this regard, what it would be, in my view, useful to look at is that there is actually a different starting point for different areas or different businesses or different business models. Indeed, some of the companies are already actively engaged in various voluntary data sharing schemes because they see benefits for it in order to develop their future business. They are initiating these in order to make sure that they can actually not only innovate, but they can grow their market share or market size. We see that some of the products would be much easier because of the structure to share data on. And as I said, we already have some examples of best practices, and I don't mean only in open banking, which is, well, that is, let's say, now existing, established sort of a framework for cooperation. But I think in other areas, some have good examples, like, let's say, pension funds, for instance, and so some of them are not there yet, and some of them, I think, they are looking for identifying clear opportunities, and I think also running a very thorough cost-benefit analysis of how to approach this, and that could be the case, for instance, of insurance sector. So I think there is a merit actually in discussing the scope, maybe also sort of a phasing or staging of the process. Do we need actually to cover all the sector at one time immediately? Would it make sense, for instance, to have sort of a, let's say, starting phase for those who would be more prepared and ready to engage? Can we maybe speak about sort of a piloting, like a pilot project for those who would be ready to engage, like we did, for instance, in the DLT pilot regime, a very specific area to go ahead. So I think these could be considerations actually, where I would like to also to hear feedback from the industry, because when we look at the proposal, it's extremely complex. I think it would be very difficult actually to find an answer which would be one size fits all approach. And also, I think even the deadlines that we look at in the Commission proposal for some parts of the industry can be actually very ambitious in terms of investments, organizing themselves, looking into tapping into opportunities, etc., etc. So I think, in my view, definitely these area would require a little bit more attention. What I think would be exactly, or should be, the subject of our exchanges on how we see this framework to develop. And then obviously, I think many aspects that Michael already mentioned in introductory remarks. How we make sure that we really guarantee the data protection. How we make sure that the consumers have the choice that they expect to have. How we empower them in terms of also, I think, sort of a financial literacy and etc. And also, I think there's sort of an elephant in the room. How about big techs? Companies that are actually very, very operational and very able when it comes to dealing with data and sharing data. I think Michael mentioned that. I mean, he proposed some sort of an approach how to deal with them. But I think this also should be a serious point of our discussions in the EU.
Well, thanks very much, Andre. And I think you put the emphasis on one key part of a proposal, which is indeed the scope and the calling for industry input. So we have industry here. Let's hear a little bit early thoughts on that. Maximilian, shall we start from you from a kind of a broader industry perspective? You alluded to the kind of opportunities of kind of data sharing in many products in generic terms. The Commission proposal indeed it has a broad scope, subject to certain exclusions of data sets where kind of the exclusion risks outweigh the potential innovation. What is your perspective on the kind of the scope, the implications of the scope? Is it too much of a burden for the industry to kind of weather that? Do one need to consider staged approaches along the lines suggested by Andre? In that case, in which areas do you think are more prepared? Which should go first? Which should go last?
Yeah, it's indeed a very, very broad scope. I would not say it's a burden, but it's a very, very ambitious project or initiative, it might say. So I welcome the panelists' opinions of facing a staging approach. I think that makes much sense, and we should give really the industry a place to build such data sharing infrastructure. So the SPA scheme was mentioned already. So I think that we should give freedom to the industry to build solutions. And in terms of use cases, for instance, what I could imagine is that we see more connection between bank and insurance products, so that we have a broader perspective on the financial situation of customers, but also if we look at pensions. So I think there's opportunities that we have not yet really taken into consideration. However, there's challenges. I mentioned it already, and particularly one challenge that I see, and I think we need to find a solution for it, is FIDA does not mean that there is just one directional data sharing mechanism. It should be two-way street. Yeah. So Joris mentioned it already. Deutsche Bank as many others, build capabilities to make data accessible. We should find ways that also other industry players make the same, so that there is a sharing mechanism that goes into two directions, so that banks can build additional services, but also other players. I think that's very important. I see lots of opportunities to also consider more opportunities on the embedded finance area. So
we'll see. While I'm sure we'll get back in a second or two, but in the meantime, let's pass the ball on. Joris, I think you've been explicitly mentioned, so why don't I ask you? You heard Andre's questions around the scope. Reflections your side?
Yeah, I like the idea of having a pilot in scope. I think that's basically the same way we started as an API program. If we would have started with a big bang, it would have been super difficult. So we started, for instance, with what we knew, what would happen with PSD2, and added other portfolio information, credit card, saving account, security account things. So I think if I look at the open finance framework, I would say it makes sense to start with a limited scope, but make sure you can build meaningful products with it. Because beside all the discussions that we are going to have around schemes and building the underlying structure, I think we should also focus on what is the feedback from all the participants with regard to the potential outcome. So yes, banks and insurance companies, like Maximilian just said, that might be just a natural fit. There might be others we cannot think about right now, hopefully. So this is maybe where the real innovation could then happen. And I guess while rolling out the framework, it makes sense to look at what are the actual examples and results that are built with it. What are the obstacles the market players face while building it? What can be maybe adopted to reality? I think that's also worthwhile, because in our case, we had a very abstract discussion at the beginning. No one knew back then what open banking and open finance is. But when we had the first product available in the App Store using our data, that made a difference. And I guess from a consumer perspective, yes, you use open banking in some ways right now, but not that you can ask a customer on the street, like, what is your experience with open banking? How do you have trust in solutions? And I guess hopefully this will change, that there are more products and customers will maybe not use the word open banking, but they will say, well, it's kind of clever how can I start to use open banking in a different way, and it helps me to solve a big problem or small problem in my life, so that it becomes rather life-centric. So that would be my hope.
Okay, now it's an interesting point there on use cases, in the sense that also from open banking, perhaps the use cases we had in mind at the time when we designed the framework are not necessarily the use cases that have actually been developed when things have actually happened on the ground, which highlights a little bit both the merits of kind of thinking about concrete use cases, but also perhaps the problems of kind of legislating for these use cases. Aoife, we'll get to you in a bit, but just Maximilian, you were cut off midstream. Was there any kind of words of wisdom in particular that you would like to deliver before we turn to Aoife?
Yeah, I think we should have a look at further embedded finance opportunities, where we enable infrastructures where banks and financial services provider can connect to other industries more easily. And I think FIDA can be really a facilitator, if not building the bridge to other industries, so that we find more connection to other services in the healthcare sector that I wanted to mention, in the insurance sector, into the pension sector, so that we create a broader value for the customer, a broader financial market view to customers. I think that would be really creating value. It's already starting. We see use cases coming up, but if we have that standardized infrastructure, there will be for sure coming more.
Standardized infrastructure. We'll get to that in a bit. Extremely important. But before that, let's perhaps conclude on the scope. Aoife, your perspective. FIDA broad scope. Open banking experiences already a little bit difficult. What are your views?
I think just to pick up on 2 points, one is on from Joris as well, is that PSD2 was such an abstract construct, and then when it became real, then we had a lot of the challenges And I think actually learning from that is those use cases. And, you know, I know it's a pragmatic application of what we have discussed. And then this becomes more also towards the consumer and the trust piece, which is so important as well. But on the data point, I think at the moment we would see the scope as a little bit broad, and which then inherently increases the risk of liability for data holders. And once that risk is apparent, then people become very nervous about all sorts of things. But I think just on that piece is, you know, potentially it includes IP and proprietary data at the moment. That's something that we would not see ourselves in the scope of it. And then also just the definition of consumer data should be limited to raw pre-processed data. And then the narrower the definition now would ensure that data is actually utilized in the most authentic way. I think that's important for us. But that also speaks to the staging process too. Getting these points right and then building the use case. And then that's also building, like, it's the modular effect again. It's building trust upon trust that this is working, that the characteristics and the framework is sound. And then actually people are more willing to invest. And I think the innovation piece is what we all want to see, which is leading to better consumer outcomes. But you need a certainty in some level in order to build confidence in those investments being made in the future. And that's also where the use cases are very important, because then people can see a realization from the abstract to the pragmatic to actually an outcome that is clear and a value add to both consumers and the wider industry. But yes, the clarification on the scope would support that a lot.
Yeah. So calls for clarification, feeling that it's a little bit too broad the scope, need to focus on making it concrete. Simonas, we've heard from industry kind of a perspective on the scope. From a regulatory supervisory perspective, what is your take on the kind of level of ambition in the sense of a proposal that is on the table, and notably in terms of scope?
Yes, so from supervisory perspective, of course, I don't see, major risks coming with this legislation. But just reiterating what the other panelist was telling, if we look more from this market development point of view, and if we have, and I strongly believe we should have pretty concrete goals that we need open finance developed in insurance sector or investment sector or whatever specific financial sector. We should look through this kind of service perspective, as Joris and others were mentioning. And then, of course, we need a very good balance in the legislation between this horizontal issues like data protection, control, and safety, and then more pragmatic, more concrete things on these specific modules, as I call them, on specific financial services, investment financial services, insurance financial services, because there you need, as market players say, more clarity, more specifics. You need to go through the whole, kind of value chain, and have basic things in the legislation, so market players could be ready from the very beginning to start providing services. So it's a very good balance between broad horizontal things and pragmatism in the legislation is needed, and the modular approach I think is key to have this tool working, and that such tools could work. We again have a good example in Lithuania where in the open banking framework, e-commerce is dominated by open banking, and is actually outcompeting credit card payments. So it is possible, but focus and practical application is key here.
Thanks, Simonas. So Andre, that gives you some clues already in terms of perhaps not exactly landing in what the scope should be. We hear, at least I took focus on banking, insurance, pensions, delivering services and products and use cases to consumers that make sense. It's perhaps also illustrates that, yes, there seems to be a lot of calls for kind of thinking about the scope again, but perhaps not a silver bullet as to what the exact scope should be, which perhaps goes back to what you said at the beginning, Andre. Need to think a little bit longer on this one. Anyway, I think now let's turn to another kind of key building block of FIDA, and that relates well to the kind of lessons that you've been mentioning during this panel before, which is the issue of standardization, which obviously is a key aspect in the sense that we may have all the measures in the world to establish consumer trust. We may have all the legislative framework in the world to kind of clarify when a certain data holder has to share the data, etc. If the data is not standardized and if the technical infrastructure is not there, data sharing cannot happen in any case. So the question is, how do we best achieve that? Now, we have experiences from the past that have tried to go about it in a particular way. FIDA proposes a market-led approach to standardization. So let's perhaps dig into a little bit on that and to see what your thoughts are on that. So perhaps, Joris, starting with you, this standardization foresees a little bit kind of a partnership between firms such as yours, data holders, and firms that want to provide services such as data users. You obviously, from your description before, what you do straddles a little bit of both to some extent. But how do you see these kind of partnerships between data users and data holders embedded in the approach that FIDA has with schemes, contractual schemes in a sense? What are the key challenges and the kind of key potential you see in that approach to achieving standardization?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's super important to have standards. We realized the same when we started to offer APIs, other banks started to offer individual APIs. So no third party wants to implement different kind of implementations, right? So that's one of the learnings. Standards help to allow third parties to build products in the first place. So I think they are super important. It's maybe a pragmatic approach to build the standards on top of what we already have. Like, for instance, the Berlin Group spent a lot of time defining standards. So why not reusing what we have? So I would kind of take the pragmatic approach, because I think at the end of the day, standards are an enabler, right? A technical enabler to allow all parties to provide the data, yes, but also make sure there's one single implementation to access the data. So I think that's more of a, from the developer perspective, an essential thing that you need to have, along with maybe a nice documentation or simulator of data, right? So everything that provides you easy access. But then on top of this, I think the challenge will be what are the learnings in reality? So we had this insurance and banking data example, maybe another example is lending. So while we go, what do we learn? What are extensions that are required? And there certainly will be additional things to add to the standards. And then the challenge will be, okay, how will the standard be changed? And can it be a living standard in a way? I guess at least that's for instance, when working with partner, you learn a lot, right? So again, I have to emphasize this is the best thing you can do, because everything else that you define from the top of your head is nice. It's a good starting point, but then you have to put it into practice, and then you learn data fields are missing and all those things. And that I would say is basically the challenge to then enter the stage of developing products.
Thanks, Joris. From your perspective, does the market-led approach set out in FIDA, would that offer firms such as yours and others sufficient guidance of how to go about it? And if not, what else would you see that is needed?
Well, we do broadly agree with it. I do think, though, based on the experience of PSD2, and also what Joris just explained, is about the different APIs that started to emerge and then became simply a landscape of kind of dotted of all relatively credible and but they were all sort of built on reinventing that wheel piece, which became then quite fragmented in the landscape, very, very hard for third parties to connect in an efficient way. But I think more specifically to the current proposal, I think an area that is very ripe for this is the permission dashboards and promoting standards within that, so that there is an understanding of what that interface looks like how it should be, obviously that also relates to the scope and other underlying topics, but that there's an industry approach to the permissions management. And if we don't do that, then we're just, again, facing potential fragmentation and these barriers to the rollout of that, because it becomes very fragmented across Europe and across even within markets and across industry players. So I think if we actually want to, the goal of that is to empower consumers and to facilitate the end consumer in a very clear way to about data access, data sharing piece. I think that's where standards will be super important. So it's industry led, but I think there needs to be an understanding within that industry will need to come together in a very concerted way to drive how that looks like. And that also, again, is very important, as I said, towards the end consumer. And ultimately, we want them to have trust and we want them to have certainty within how they're interacting with these products. And that's a very important interface in all of this.
Thanks, indeed. The need to come together. In a sense, it takes two to tango if the two parties here are the data holders and the data users. Maximilian, what is your perspective on this in terms of achieving the standardization? What is needed for kind of data holders and data users to agree on a given standard in as smooth a way as possible? And does FIDA contain all of that? If not, what could be added?
Yeah, I think there are several elements. So first of all, we need an industry-specific approach whereby parties analyze what data can be made accessible at all. Because if we look at the industry players, there are different readiness levels, if I may say. Particularly if I look at the insurance companies, not all data is real-time data. So that would be my first answer. Second answer is more from a transactional perspective. So find the right mechanisms to obtain data, to get access to data. So I'm looking to authentication mechanism, data sharing mechanism. So find the right approach that it's easy for the customer on the one hand, but also secure from the other hand. And third is, and I think that's part of the FIDA proposal, and I really welcome it, that we have a regulated environment whereby all parties act in a licensed way, so that there is really trust in that ecosystem, so that all parties feel regulated on the same level. And I think that's really key. Also from a data liability perspective, but also from a security and infrastructure perspective.
Well, thanks a lot, Maximilian. And that, I think, it provides a kind of a good bridge to you, Andre. I mean, overall reactions to what you've heard in terms of and your perspectives as well on this key building block of data sharing in finance, the kind of standardization. Maximilian just mentioned the kind of benefit of a kind of having a regulated environment that provides trust and certainty to everybody involved. Views your side on that, and also specifically how it relates to standardization.
Indeed, in my view, definitely, or one of the key points for the actually success, if we measure it by tapping into potential of the data sharing in financial services, and I think we have a lot of not only best practices, but I think also some worst practices already known from the open banking framework, where I think the debate on the quality of data and the standards possibly to be set is also ongoing. And I think also the debate here sort of reflects a variety of views that I think last year I organized or co-organized an event in the European Parliament on the open banking with a lot of stakeholders in place, and we had exactly this debate about standardization. And I would say the audience there was basically split in two halves. One saying that the market-led initiative is the one to sort of prevail, because that's where is the know-how, and also I think they're best the closest to the implementation. And the critics were saying, yeah, look, the market was never able to organize itself, and people were not able to understand or even agree on a sort of a coordinated approach, and that makes and opens actually the opportunity for the regulators and the authorities to step in, which was exactly what the other half didn't want to happen. I think what we see now in FIDA, it's actually what there's a priority to the market-led initiative, the schemes that should be proposed by the industry. But there's also this option that, if the industry doesn't organize itself, the Commission will step in. And I think this is, balanced, that we should look into whether this would be the right approach. And to be honest, I would see it more as a sort of a common exercise. So not only that the market should organize itself, and maybe in some cases, as we discussed earlier, there are some areas of financial services that will be much more advanced and ready actually to engage. Some of them would really need to start from scratch, even in terms of building infrastructure and actually structuring the entire ecosystem. So the industry can actually organize itself, following up this idea that it should be market-led. But what would prevent the authorities actually to be engaged in the process from the very beginning? Maybe as a consultation body, or as a sort of a counterpart in terms of promoting what I think should be also sort of our legislative blueprint in other areas, so sort of a regulatory dialogue, or we can call it sandboxing, or whatever we call it. So anything, any kind of environment that brings together the industry players and the authorities, the regulators, and actually to start the process, instead of sort of dividing it like it's now in FIDA, saying so look, the market has 18 months now to organize itself. If it doesn't work, the Commission steps in and organize everything for the market. That's very roughly how the proposal lies. And I think we can actually merge these together and say, okay, I mean, maybe the industry would need more time, but we should not actually put this in the opposition. We can actually put it in a sort of a cooperation, and where the market would need a sort of a consultation or even help from the authorities, and even I think the authorities to understand better the reality of that specific area, and the reality, for instance, of the specific sector where the data sharing will happen. Then we would not lose time, and we can actually engage it and end up with something that can bring I think more let's say in terms of quality, improved results, and also delivering on what we expect from it. But that's more sort of a line of thinking, how to engage it. Maybe it's a sort of a compromise. I don't know if it would work exactly the way we discuss it right now in practice, but I think if we are about to provide a framework, I think we should not look away from this option as well.
Mm. Well, thank you, Andre. Very thoughtful. Simona, from your perspective, in a sense, Commission proposal, carrot and stick. Carrot, market, please get ready. Stick, if you're not ready in 18 months, you come in. Andre is pleading for perhaps more kind of hands-on engagement from supervisors a little bit earlier in the process to kind of get standardization going. You as a supervisor, reactions, reviews?
Well, in principle, I would agree with what Andre was telling. I think definitely standards are crucial for open finance to work. That's for sure. Secondly, of course, market players knows best and use standards every day. So they should be kind of standardization should be based on market knowledge and market driven. But I guess public sector should be as a facilitator and following the process, because of course market players, main interest of the market player, of course, is about itself. It's natural to create value for the company, and then the public sector should look and have broad goals, how to develop the market in a balanced way, with proper risk controls and so on. So I think definitely a combination of two, market driven, but with the good facilitation from the public sector, that could bring best results. Again, our experience in Lithuania vividly shows that we were very much engaged when the open banking setting was made. We had good results. Another example is instant payments. Again, market players were driving the process, but we were facilitating and trying to agree within the market deadlines on when we start with instant payments and so on. So I think this combination and close cooperation is a key to success.
Thank you very much. Now we're reaching the close of this panel. I would like to invite the panelists perhaps to, as a final concluding remark, given the limited time we have available, we have about 3 minutes. One recommendation for the consideration of the kind of further negotiations of FIDA. Andre, obviously you will have an ability to make much more than one recommendation during this process, but for the benefit of this panel, perhaps we can limit it to one. But let's start with Afore. If you were to make one recommendation for the consideration when we are kind of continuing to negotiate FIDA, what would that be?
Accuracy over speed. I think getting this right now is so important because this will be in place for quite a few years, and we've already learned a lot from PSD2. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Afore. Joris, what's your take?
I like what Andre, what I got from you was think about in terms of partnerships, like working on something together. I like that. And I would say, let's focus on the outcome in terms of products for the customers and learn from that.
Thank you. Maximilian.
Focus on concrete use cases and also consider other regulations. So don't increase the regulatory burden or don't make the burden too high. Look for smaller functional use cases.
Okay, Simonas, supervisory perspective.
Yeah, have a modular approach as a very great potential within this legislation, but it's complex, and we need kind of reduce this complexity to make it practical. So this modular approach and thinking about the outcomes and concrete financial services and changes within this ecosystem, I think is the key to success.
Thank you. Andre, word to you.
Thank you. I think I would definitely subscribe to all the recommendations that were just formulated. I think indeed, I mean, gradual approach. I think we should take our time. We need to get it right. There is no hurry. Obviously, we need to deliver on our work, but I think there is no hurry. And I think like real plea and call. I think it's also sort of based on what is currently happening for very close cooperation between the industry and the regulators, the policymakers, the legislators. Because I think actually to find a good balance in terms of how this entire framework should be shaped and also how it should be sort of introduced so that it really delivers on the key areas and the key expectations that we have. I think that would be, in my view, the most sensitive, most problematic, but critical in all terms, all meanings of the term, critical for success of open finance framework in Europe. And as I said, we have a proposal. Let's look at it and let's actually find ways how we can work so that we meet all these expectations and we can sort of also deliver on these recommendations that were just formulated by this panel.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you then for this very thoughtful and rich debate. Certainly a lot of food for thought, which I think will be very helpful in the process as we go forward. European regulatory processes are certainly long, by definition, they are probably going to be a little bit longer this year, given also the elections this time. But so that's perhaps is also a reflection take into account that speed is not always built into our processes to start with. And we need to maintain a certain degree of momentum. But this was certainly very, very helpful, also from my perspective. So big thanks to all of you. And Nicholas, I hand the floor back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthias, and to all panelists, to Eva, Andre, Simonas, Joris, and Maximilian for a really, really, as you say, very deep and interesting discussion. And the way the speed is going, Matthias, we might do this again in the 9th conference. Let's see how far you've got by then with the process. Thanks very much indeed.